there's Grace. What are we going to be talking about?
Uh, Not the Queen.
Well, I wanted to ask you a quick
Okay.
question.
Okay. Okay.
Are you watching it? Can I ask you a personal question? How is Astrid taking this? Is Astrid,
Uh, she's not dealing with it very well. She's sort of catatonic on the couch right now, which is also where I'm at.
dogatonic, you mean? Okay. And you have to tell the bees. I understand the beekeepers have to actually tell the bees that the queen is dead. Do you have to tell
Really?
the pets? Yeah, the beekeepers.
Well,
So, how are your parents taking it in all seriousness? I bet.
they've they've gone to Spain to get away from it all. So I'm not from a family of royalists, David. And it hasn't really affected me that much. So I'm glad to hear, though, on the last episode of the show that you've come around, you've been
Yeah.
persuaded by us all.
And
So,
I've been fined by the British government.
oh, really?
Yeah, I've been fined. They're fining people now. If you heckle the funeral,
Oh, you'll get arrested if you heckle the funeral
now
under the policing bill. Yeah.
this is a new bill, but before that,
Mm.
you could call Andrew a sick old man and not get arrested.
In theory, yes. But this policing bill that went through, I think it's been around for a while, but it passed earlier this year. It gives the police just broad discretion to basically define any protest as illegal, and especially to do with the volume of your protest, if it's causing problems for people, if it's disrupting, what protest does when it's effective, it disrupts situations.
Mhm.
So it basically, it's very scary, and it's being used, to stifle Republican protest in this country in the wake of the Queen's death.
Well, you run our China desk.
Yes, and that is in fact what I want to talk about.
I like saying that. You run our China desk.
I did want to mention just one thought before we get to China, on the Queen's death, and that is, I think it possibly raises some interesting questions about history, and particularly the way we think about periods of history, questions of periodization, you would call them. I have a feeling that in the future, historians might look back and see her death as marking the end of the post-war international order, perhaps. Seems like a milestone in any case.
It won't be the cause of it, but
No, not
it'll
causal,
be
just
it'll just
a
be a
kind of,
touchstone.
just a little, a marker, a kind of neat way to summarize this period, the period of her rule, which obviously saw Britain transition from having an empire to having to kind of decolonization. And and right now, obviously,
The first Elizabeth introduced globalization to Great Britain, and the second Elizabeth is going to will be remembered for creating a more insular, or lived during a time when Great Britain
yeah,
turned its back on the rest of the world.
absolutely. And the balance, the kind of global balance of power is shifting dramatically, I think, in the past 2 decades. Um, Especially when it comes to the rise of China, what's happening with Russia right now, and obviously the United States as well. So tonight, I just wanted to talk briefly, and I've only got 15 minutes, so I won't bore people for
You're,
too long. But
you
there's something important going on right now, and that is, there is a bill, or an act in that came out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee today. It was passed today, 17 votes to 5, called the Taiwan Policy Act, 2022. And this is basically an upgrade to the Taiwan Relations Act, which I've spoken about on the show before. The Taiwan Relations Act was passed in 1979, and it basically governs the US's unofficial relationship with Taiwan, and it legally mandates arms sales to Taiwan for the purpose of Taiwan being able to defend itself. It uses that phrase, defend itself. So that act was passed because the US switched its recognition from the Republic of China on Taiwan to the People's Republic of China on the mainland in 1979. And today, the Taiwan Policy Act, which passed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, is basically kind of restructuring or upgrading, proposing to upgrade the US's unofficial ties with Taiwan. And they are still unofficial in this bill, but they're getting kind of closer and closer to what looks like an official relationship. So what people need to know about this bill, it was authored by Bob Menendez and Lindsey Graham, a Democrat and a Republican.
That can't be good.
Yeah, I mean, these two, they're very strong advocates for Taiwan. They've both visited Taiwan. They went on a trip several months ago.
Not always a good idea to go on a trip with Senator Menendez, by the way.
Really?
It was a trip to the Dominican Republic, which got into a little trouble.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
So this bill, basically two key components. The first one being to do with military spending, and the second key component being to do with the kind of symbolic or sort of ceremonial aspects of the relationship, which is actually the more controversial piece. Even though the military spending is significant, this bill entails between, I've seen 4.5 billion, I've also seen 6.5 billion, I'm not sure which is correct, but somewhere between those two figures, that amount in direct military assistance to Taiwan over 4 years. It outlines a broad kind of set of economic sanctions that would be applied to China in the case of a sort of significant increase in aggression, basically an invasion. It also supports Taiwan's participation in certain international organizations that Taiwan has not been able to participate in for at least 10, 15 years, such as the World Health Organization. And it would designate Taiwan a major non-NATO ally. That's a quote, major non-NATO ally. And that is a designation that is reserved for the US's closest partners that are not in NATO. Now, the final thing that I want to note that this bill contains is a name change. So it proposes that the de facto Taiwanese embassy, which is called the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, I believe, TECRO is the acronym. Now under this bill would become the Taiwan Representative Office. And, you know, this gets to the question of why this word Taiwan is so sensitive. People will be aware that Taiwan, when it competes in the Olympics, it competes under the name Chinese Taipei. And that's because Taiwan is not, Taiwan actually designates an island. The island of Taiwan is the main island that the Republic of China currently governs. And the Republic of China is officially called the Republic of China. It's not called Taiwan. And so Taiwan is kind of associated with basically the idea of independence. You know, hardcore independence advocates would prefer to see a Taiwan Republic, for example, after independence. So this is quite a serious set of provisions. But it certainly stops short of official recognition or, you know, explicitly undermining the One China policy. And I want to just quote Menendez. So he made a statement about this act. He said, "The bill we're approving today makes clear the United States does not seek war or increase tensions with Beijing, just the opposite. We are carefully and strategically lowering the existential threats facing Taiwan by raising the cost of taking the island by force so that it becomes too high a risk and unachievable." So basically, his rationale, or at least his stated rationale, is that they are raising the stakes for China, just in the, with the idea being that they are going to deter an invasion. I'm not sure yet what I think of that, but it's certainly going to upset China. The Chinese ambassador apparently told a State Department, a senior State Department person that he met a few weeks ago, that if this bill is passed, US-China relations will, quote, collapse. And, the Chinese side have said they see this as a total kind of deconstruction of the one China policy. So that's something,
Right.
something fun on the horizon. But I would say this has just passed the committee. There's no sense of when it's going to be voted on in the Senate. It would obviously have to pass Congress. Biden is apparently not super keen on this bill. Jake Sullivan has been kind of hedging around this bill. I think they're worried that it's a bit too much. So it may not really move much further, but there's a suggestion that some of the provisions, for example, the military spending, might be folded into the National Defense Authorization Act, which is coming later this year. Also note that a few senators voted against it. Rand Paul, Ed Markey, a Democrat, Chris Murphy, Chris Van Hollen, one other who I don't have. So there was some opposition based on this idea that it's going to be just too provocative to China.
So in October, Xi, the leader of China, is going to go to the big Communist Party meeting and get a third term, we think. And he's making his first trips since COVID. He's meeting with Putin, I think today, and he's meeting with Modi in India on Friday. Your thoughts about his meeting with Putin?
Yeah, so this was very interesting, actually. And often with these meetings, a lot comes down to the official readouts or the statements that get put out by the respective ministries of foreign affairs after the meeting, right? And they're often different. And because they're given in different languages and then they're translated into English, it gets very kind of tricky and complicated. And that was really highlighted by Xi's meeting with Putin. And last week, Xi's, I say China's kind of number 3 official, a guy called Li Jianshu, he went to Moscow to kind of set the tone for Xi's meeting with Putin. He met with some heads of the Duma. And fascinatingly, his remarks were recorded, were filmed by the Duma TV channel, and they were broadcast. And we would actually not know what he said if it weren't for this recording, which has been put out. And he's obviously speaking Chinese. And I think there's some subtitled versions now, but if you understand Chinese, you can get a really clear sense of what he's saying. Now, China did not release a version of his statement in their media. And so it seems like his words were actually not meant to be published at all. And they were certainly not meant for a domestic Chinese audience. And what he said has been taken as the kind of strongest statement of Chinese support for Russia yet. He used the word, what did he say? I've got it here. He actually raised the question of Ukraine directly. Mm-hmm. He wasn't asked about it. He raised it and said that the US and NATO cornered Russia right on its doorstep. This touched on Russia's national security and its people's lives and safety. And he said, China understands that Russia took appropriate measures and we are coordinating in various ways. So this caused a huge storm in Europe. Many people were kind of up in arms about this. A lot hinges on the translation of the word coordinating. Some outlets translated it as assistance, like we are providing Russia with assistance. It's not quite that, I would say, the Chinese, it's more like a kind of, coordination role. But it's just very interesting that this was kind of, it wasn't leaked as such, but it was shown on Russian TV, but not on Chinese TV, and certainly not reported in the media. And all of that to say that when Xi and Putin met in Uzbekistan this week, they also released quite divergent statements about what they talked about. So the Russian side released a statement saying that we value the balanced position of our Chinese friends when it comes to the Ukraine crisis. And we understand that China has questions and concerns about this. So it's very interesting that it's almost like Putin is providing cover for Xi, basically saying, Xi's not too happy with us, or he has some concerns about what we're doing. It's very convenient, I think, for Xi Jinping, that particular statement. On the other hand, China's statement about the meeting was extremely vague. No mention of any specific issues like Ukraine, for example, just pledging mutual support on issues pertaining to each other's core interests. So I think from this meeting, what you can see is a bit of a power imbalance between these two leaders, with Xi Jinping coming out of this looking like the senior partner, the big brother figure,
Right.
and Putin looking much more kind of just beholden to Xi and his support. And I think that might have something to do with the way the war is going for Russia. I know that, Ukraine has made some gains in the past week, and so that might provide some context. But I love reading these different statements and kind of figuring out where the real version lies,
Right. And I'm not going to do that's what she said, Joe.
That's what she said, of course.
I'm not going to do that. I'm too old.